It was an ordinary Wednesday evening. I was sitting in the living room watching TV when I noticed she had been on the phone for half an hour. Nothing unusual, you might think, but this time it felt different. She was speaking in a whisper, as if afraid someone might hear her. When I walked into the room, her tone suddenly changed. She quickly ended the call, saying only, "All right, I'll call you back later." After that, she put her phone face down on the table. It was a small thing, but something about that moment made me suspicious. This wasn't like her. We had always been open with each other, never hiding anything. But now, it felt as though I was looking at a completely different person. I began to recall the events of the past few weeks. Her cold tone whenever I asked how her day had been. The way she had stopped smiling during our evenings together. She often said she had a lot of work, but even on weekends, she seemed distant. Her phone was always with her, even when she went to shower, something she had never done before. Once, when I asked if everything was okay, she simply brushed it off. "Of course, I've just got a lot on my plate." Her words sounded simple enough, but her eyes, something had changed in them. It was like a shadow I couldn't quite interpret. And then there were more signs. She started coming home late. Meetings, she said, were very important. But here's what confused me. Usually, when she came home from work, she would be tired but still talk about her day. Now, complete silence. She would just pass by me, saying she needed to rest. One evening, after she had fallen asleep, I decided to check her bag. This wasn't like me, but my curiosity was eating me alive. Inside, I found a new lipstick, a shade she had never worn before. Her perfume had changed too, sweeter, more alluring. And then there was the moment I'll never forget. She had left her laptop open on the kitchen table by accident. It was only for a few seconds while she stepped into another room, but it was enough. I noticed she was chatting with someone on a messenger app. Just a few words, but they left endless questions in my mind. "I miss you too. See you soon." My imagination started painting the worst scenarios. Who was this person? What did "see you soon" mean? That night, I couldn't sleep. Her behavior had become a puzzle, and I felt like I was standing on the edge of something far bigger than I could imagine. But the main question remained. What was she hiding? It all began when I was about to take out the trash. It was an ordinary day, nothing unusual, until I happened to notice something in her jacket that was hanging by the door. It was a small piece of paper, as if someone had hastily stuffed it into her pocket. I almost walked past it, but something made me stop. I carefully pulled it out. It was a receipt. At first glance, it didn't seem like much, a receipt from a restaurant. But when I looked closer, a strange feeling came over me. We had never been to this place. I hadn't even heard of it. La Belle Maison. It sounded like the kind of place that served expensive dishes, something exclusive, and honestly, not like us at all. Then it got even more interesting. The receipt showed a table for two and 2 glasses of wine. One of the wines was something she would never order. Her favorite wine had always been white, but here, on the receipt, was red Merlot. Who was the other glass for? I thought maybe it was a colleague, someone she often discussed projects with. But something deep inside whispered, this wasn't just lunch with a coworker. I tried to dismiss my doubts. She had always been honest with me, hadn't she? I put the receipt back in her pocket, trying not to give it too much weight. But from that moment on, it stayed in my mind. That evening, as we sat at the table, I asked her how her day had gone. Her response was short, too short. The usual, lots of work. She didn't even look up, busy with her phone. This wasn't like our usual conversations. I noticed that she avoided eye contact. The next day at work, I couldn't focus. The restaurant receipt seemed to burn in my mind. I imagined her at that table with someone else. Her smile, her voice, her laughter, it all seemed no longer mine. Who was this person? Why hadn't she told me about this lunch? I tried to come up with logical explanations. Maybe it was a business meeting. Maybe it was a random receipt that someone else left. But every attempt to justify the situation only added to my unease. That evening, As we watched a movie, I found myself unable to concentrate. I watched her instead. She looked calm, even a little happy. But that receipt continued to haunt me. To calm myself, I decided to look up the restaurant online. La Belle Maison turned out to be a luxurious place with a cozy atmosphere, live music, and, as it turned out, a reputation for being a romantic destination. It was the kind of place where people go on dates. At that moment, I realized this wasn't just a coincidence. My mind began to piece together scenarios. She was hiding something, but what? The audience remains tense. Is this just an innocent coincidence? Or perhaps this receipt is the first piece of evidence that her distance hides something deeper? And most importantly, should he break the silence and start asking questions? The answers are yet to come, but the feeling of unease has already taken root in the hero's heart and the audience's. It was an ordinary evening, and everything seemed to be going as usual. She was in another room while I stayed in the kitchen preparing dinner. Her phone was on the table, and I noticed it light up with an incoming call. The name on the screen caught my attention. Alex. It was a name I wasn't familiar with. She didn't seem to hear the phone, so I called out, "Hey, your phone's ringing." She appeared from the other room faster than I expected. Her movements were sharp, almost rushed. She picked up the phone and looked at the screen, her expression changing instantly. It became tense. I couldn't help but notice the shift. She gave a faint smile and said, "It's just work. I'll be back in a moment." Then she walked into another room. This made me slightly uneasy. Normally, she would answer calls in front of me. We never hid anything from each other. But this time, it seemed like she was doing everything she could to have privacy. I stayed in the kitchen, but my ears involuntarily tuned into her voice. She was speaking softly, almost whispering, so quietly that I could barely make out the words. But one sentence stood out clearly, making me freeze in place. "I can't talk now, he's here." He's here? What was that supposed to mean? Who was he? And why couldn't she talk in front of me? My heart started racing. That one sentence opened the door to my worst suspicions. I decided not to walk into the room immediately. Instead, I stood by the kitchen trying to catch more of the conversation. Her voice became even quieter, and now it was impossible to understand anything. A few minutes later, she returned to the kitchen as if nothing had happened. Her face looked calm, but I noticed that she no longer left her phone on the table. It was now in her pocket. This struck me as odd because she usually left it lying around. I acted as though I hadn't noticed anything, but my eyes never left her. She took a sip of her wine, but I noticed her hand trembling slightly. I caught myself looking for the smallest signs that this was all just my imagination. When she went to take a shower, I made a decision. It might have been wrong, but my curiosity and anxiety were eating me alive. I quickly grabbed her phone and checked her messages. There was nothing. No trace of the call. She had deleted it. It felt like a punch to the gut. Why had she done that? What exactly was she hiding? I felt my inner tension grow stronger. My thoughts now revolved around one question. Was this something serious? I put the phone back in its place and went to the living room, trying to appear calm. But that moment had changed everything. From then on, I could no longer look at her the same way. There was something hidden in her actions, and I didn't know if I wanted to uncover the truth or if I was ready to face what it might be. In the days that followed, I couldn't find peace. My suspicions grew like a snowball, and I decided I had to gather more information. If she was hiding something, I needed to find out. I started paying attention to every detail, even the smallest things that I might have overlooked before. At first, I noticed her new purchases. In the past, she always showed me everything she bought, even if it was just a simple t-shirt. She loved sharing her little joys, and we would celebrate them together. But now, things were different. One evening, I saw a few new dresses in the closet. They didn't look like her usual style. They were more elegant, more provocative with attention to detail. They weren't the kind of thing she'd typically wear in our day-to-day life. I asked her where she planned to wear those dresses. She smiled and said, "Oh, just for upcoming work meetings. You know how important it is to look professional." But I didn't recall her office meetings ever requiring such outfits. Then there were the new perfumes. She had never changed her scent before, saying that her old fragrance reminded her of our first meeting. But suddenly it had changed. The new scent was sweet, seductive, with notes I had never smelled on her before. "What happened to your old perfume?" I asked one evening. She responded briefly. "I decided to try something new." Her tone was calm, but the change made me uneasy. Her business trips also became more frequent. She often mentioned that her office had a new project and required a lot of client meetings in different cities. But whenever I asked for details, she dodged the questions. She started coming home late, sometimes even around midnight, explaining it away as project complications. Once, when I asked why her calls during these trips were so short, she simply brushed it off. "You know how much work there is." My suspicions grew stronger when I accidentally noticed her calendar. It had marked dates and times, but no explanations or details. All I could see were vague entries like personal meeting or business dinner. She never mentioned these events, and when I asked, her answers were vague. One day, I decided to do something I had never done before. When she left her bag on the couch, I carefully opened it. Inside, I found a receipt from the dry cleaners. On it was listed a dress I had never seen at home. Why would she clean something she didn't even wear? With each passing day, the tension between us grew, even though we didn't talk about it openly. She seemed happy, too happy. It was strange. When we were together, her smile seemed genuine, but in her eyes, I saw something else. A secret I couldn't figure out. I began to feel like I was becoming obsessed with finding answers. One day, when she left for another business trip, I decided to track her movements. I enabled the geolocation on her phone, doing it quickly while she was in the bathroom. This game of detective work became more than just a desire to find the truth. It was a challenge, like trying to solve a puzzle with thousands of pieces, but some of the parts were missing. The intrigue only grew. What was she hiding? Who were these dresses for? Was it really work or something more? One ordinary evening, while she was away on a business trip, I sat at home, trying to focus on my own work. But my thoughts kept circling back to her strange behavior. The tension began to fill every moment of my day. I couldn't shake the feeling that something serious was happening behind my back. That evening, I decided to tidy up the bedroom, a simple excuse to distract myself. As I was cleaning, I came across her small black handbag, the one that always hung in the closet. She rarely used it, so I decided to take a look inside. I didn't know why I did it. It wasn't like me, but curiosity and anxiety drove me to unzip it. And that's when I saw it, a small, shiny metal key. It looked new, polished. It was a key to a hotel room. On it was a tiny tag with a number, 304. My heart stopped for a moment. What did this mean? I tried to remember the last time we had stayed in a hotel, but there hadn't been any such occasion. I picked up the key and examined it closely. The tag had the name of the hotel, Grand Heights Hotel. That name didn't mean anything to me. My mind began racing with questions. When had she been there? And with whom? I put the key back, almost afraid it might explode in my hands. My heart was pounding, my thoughts spiraling into chaos. But this was only the beginning. Later that evening, I noticed her notebook lying on the dresser. She always loved making notes, lists of tasks, important meetings. I picked it up and opened it. At first, everything looked normal. Work notes, reminders. But on one page, in the middle of scattered scribbles, I saw something strange. Written there was, "Meeting at 7:30. J." It was written hastily, almost messily. I read the phrase several times, trying to understand its meaning. J. Who was that? What kind of meeting was this? My heart tightened again. This J was unfamiliar to me. I had never heard her mention anyone with those initials. I had a growing sense that I was touching a secret she was trying hard to hide. But there was more. On another page, I saw addresses. 2 of them were familiar, our home and her office. But the third address was unknown to me. I jotted it down on a scrap of paper to investigate later. The tension was building. My mind swirled with different scenarios. Maybe it was just a work note. Maybe Jay was a client. But my intuition told me otherwise. I spent that entire night staring at the ceiling, imagining what the key and those notes could mean. That night was only the beginning. The answers to my questions were still far away, but the first clues were starting to form a picture, one that, I feared, could change my life forever. The days passed, and the tension only grew. The hotel key, the mysterious initials in her notebook, the new items she never wore at home. It all painted a picture that gave me no peace. I began to feel like I couldn't keep it all inside anymore. It was consuming me, and then I decided it was time to talk to someone I could truly trust. My best friend, Mark, was the one person I could always turn to in difficult times. He had been my ally since our university days, and we had been through a lot together. That evening, I invited him over under the pretense of having a beer and watching the game. But in truth, I had a completely different agenda. Mark noticed something was off with me even before I started talking. He took off his jacket, looked at me, and said, "All right, spill it. What's going on? You look like you haven't slept in a week." At first, I hesitated, but then I told him everything. About the change in her behavior, about that strange restaurant receipt, about the hotel room key, and the mysterious initials. Mark listened carefully, not interrupting, and when I finished, he leaned forward and said, "Listen, this sounds strange, but if you want to know the truth, you need a plan." I was surprised by his confidence. "What do you mean?" I asked. Mark looked at me with a serious expression. "We'll follow her. You want to know what's going on, right? Then you need to act, not just sit around guessing." As Mark and I approached the door to room 304, my pulse quickened. Every step felt heavier, and my mind raced with possibilities. The faint laughter and muffled voices behind the door were like daggers to my already fragile resolve. Mark, sensing my agitation, whispered, "Are you sure about this? Once we go in, there's no turning back." I didn't respond. My hand hovered over the door, trembling slightly. I could still hear her voice, light and carefree, blending with the man's deeper tone. It was the kind of conversation that felt intimate, too intimate. My thoughts spiraled. Was this proof of my worst fears? Or was I about to destroy everything over a misunderstanding? Mark nudged me gently. "We can't just barge in. Let's be smart about this." His calm voice pulled me back momentarily, but the rage and desperation within me were too strong to ignore. I decided to act. I knocked on the door firmly, my heart pounding in my chest. The laughter inside stopped abruptly. Footsteps approached, and the door opened slightly, revealing her face. For a moment, she looked shocked, then quickly masked it with a forced smile. "Oh, hey, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice strained, her eyes darting toward the man still seated inside the room. "I think the better question is, what are you doing here?" I replied, my voice trembling with suppressed anger. She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder. "It's not what it looks like," she said hurriedly, stepping out of the room and closing the door behind her before I could see more. Mark stood behind me, silently watching, his face tense but composed. I looked at her, searching her face for answers. "Then tell me," I demanded. "What's going on? Who is that man? And why are you in this hotel in this room?" She sighed, avoiding my gaze. "It's a business meeting. I told you about the project I've been working on. He's a client." "A client?" I repeated, my voice rising. And this client requires a private hotel room, expensive wine, and whatever else is happening here? She flinched at my tone. You're jumping to conclusions, she said, her voice wavering slightly. This isn't what you think. Then tell me, I shot back, feeling my patience were thin. Explain it to me right now, because I've been piecing together all these little clues and nothing adds up. Mark placed a hand on my shoulder, trying to calm me down. Maybe we should step back and talk about this later, he suggested, but I shook him off. No, I said firmly. We're not leaving until I get the truth. She looked torn, as if debating whether to tell me something or continue the charade. Finally, she sighed deeply, her shoulders slumping. All right, she said quietly. Come inside. My heart sank as she opened the door wider. The man inside stood up, looking surprised but composed. He extended a hand toward me. You must be her husband, he said with a polite smile. I've heard a lot about you. I didn't shake his hand. Instead, I looked at him, then back at her. Start talking, I said. She gestured for me and Mark to sit down. This is complicated, she began, her voice softer now. But I swear, it's not what you're imagining. She went on to explain that the man was indeed a client, someone involved in a large-scale project she had been assigned to. The hotel room was a temporary workspace, booked to finalize details away from office distractions. The wine, she claimed, was his idea of a courtesy for long negotiations. Mark listened intently, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't adding up. The warmth in her smile when she was with him, the way she touched his arm, the secrecy, it all painted a different picture. Yet her words were calm, measured, and filled with conviction. As the explanation unfolded, I felt a war inside me, logic fighting against emotion. Could I believe her? Could I trust that this was all innocent, despite everything I had seen and felt? Or was I being manipulated, lulled into a false sense of security? The man excused himself, saying he needed to make a phone call. As he left the room, I turned back to her. Look me in the eye and tell me there's nothing more to this, I said. She met my gaze, her eyes steady. There's nothing more to this, she said firmly. I promise you. For a moment, I wanted to believe her. But as Mark and I left the hotel that night, my mind couldn't stop replaying every detail, every inconsistency. The mystery wasn't solved. It had only deepened. And the audience, just like me, was left wondering, was she telling the truth, or was this just a carefully crafted lie? I stood in the hotel room, trying to piece together all my thoughts. Everything I had seen over the past few days, the receipts, the key, the mysterious calls, and the initials in her notebook, swirled in my mind like a whirlwind. In front of me stood my wife, and beside her, the man who just minutes ago seemed like my greatest adversary. I had prepared myself for the worst, but what happened next left me completely stunned. She looked at me with an expression of understanding, mixed with a touch of guilt. I didn't want it to come out like this, she began softly. But I suppose it's time to explain everything. I stood in silence, a storm of anxiety, doubt, and even anger raging within me. What exactly are you planning to explain? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. She gestured toward the table, where boxes of decorations, balloons, banners, and cards were neatly arranged. It's all for you, she said, looking me directly in the eyes. I was planning a surprise party for your birthday. I wanted to do something special, which is why I chose this place. My suspicions began to dissipate, but I was still trying to piece together how everything had appeared so incriminating. And the receipt from the restaurant? The hotel key? And him? I nodded toward the man standing beside her. The man smiled warmly and extended his hand. Malux. Your wife and I go way back. We've been friends since high school. She asked me to help organize everything, because I work here at the hotel. I've just been coordinating things on site. My wife nodded in agreement. The receipt from the restaurant was from a meeting Alex, and I had to finalize the menu for the party. The key was for the storage room where I kept all the decorations and gifts so you wouldn't suspect anything. And the calls, I just didn't want you to find out too early. It was supposed to be a surprise. I felt the ground beneath me begin to stabilize. Everything I had taken as evidence of betrayal turned out to be parts of a larger, well-intentioned plan. She had done all of this for me, and instead of trusting her, I had allowed my doubts to poison my peace of mind. I even hired a photographer to capture the moment, she added with a wry smile. But I guess the moment's already been spoiled. A wave of guilt washed over me. I thought, I'm so sorry, I said, lowering my head. I had no right to think that about you. I let my fears and imagination get the better of me. Please forgive me. She took my hands in hers and smiled. I understand, but I need you to know that you can always trust me. I looked around the room again. The decorations, the effort, the love she had poured into planning this surprise. I realized how deeply I had underestimated her and how much my own insecurities had clouded my judgment. Behind me, Mark cleared his throat, breaking the moment. Well, he said with a smirk, at least now you know she really cares about you. But you still owe me a beer for putting me through this. We all laughed, the tension finally melting away. But as the relief set in, I couldn't help but reflect. Why had I allowed myself to doubt her so easily? Was it really about her, or was it something deeper within me? This realization, more than anything else, was the true lesson of the evening. As I stood there, surrounded by love and a surprise that I had almost ruined, I made a silent vow to never let my fears cloud my trust again. Because trust, I now knew, wasn't just about her. It was about believing in the bond we had built together. That moment made me realize how easy it is to let doubt destroy what we have. I looked at her and promised myself that I would never let suspicion come between us again. The next evening, as planned, I showed up at the surprise party that was supposed to be a secret for me. Now I knew everything, but that didn't diminish my excitement. The whole day, I couldn't stop thinking about how much effort she had put into organizing this for me. At the same time, I couldn't shake the lingering guilt for the doubts that had consumed me. The hotel ballroom was transformed into the perfect celebration venue. Balloons, banners, my favorite playlist, and an elaborate cake with a giant happy birthday sign. It all looked like a scene straight out of a movie. When I walked in, all my friends, family, and even a few colleagues jumped up, yelling, "Surprise!" Their smiles and warm embraces instantly melted away the tension that had lingered within me over the past few days. She looked absolutely stunning, her eyes glowing with happiness, and her smile was one I hadn't seen in a long time. She walked up to me, took my hand, and whispered, "This is all for you. I wanted to remind you how much I love you." The evening was perfect. We danced, laughed, took pictures, and for the first time in days, I let go of all my worries. But then, just as everyone was gathered around, she suddenly took a microphone and tapped it gently to get everyone's attention. "Today, we're celebrating the birthday of the best man I know," she began. "The man who has always been there for me, who supports me in everything, and who I love more than anything. But I have one more surprise for you," she said, looking at me with the same sparkle in her eyes that she had on our wedding day. The room went silent. All eyes were on her. My heart began to race again. But this time it was a different kind of anticipation. She handed me a small box wrapped with a red ribbon. I opened it, and inside were keys. I looked up at her, confused, and she said, "These are the keys to our new home. The home we've always dreamed of." I was stunned. "A home?" was all I could manage to say. She smiled. "Yes, I found it a few months ago. The house by the beach, the one you've always talked about. I wanted to do something special for us, to remind us that life is more than just routines. This is our place, our home, where we can start a new chapter in our lives. On the screen behind her, an image of the house appeared. It was a perfect two-story cottage with large windows, a view of the ocean, and a cozy terrace. The guests gasped, and I just stood there, holding the keys in my hand, speechless. My eyes filled with tears. I couldn't believe she had done this for us. Everything I had felt before, the doubts, the fears, the jealousy, now seemed so insignificant and misplaced. I took her hands in mine and said, "You're the best thing that has ever happened to me. I don't deserve any of this, but I promise I'll do everything to make you happy every single day." The guests erupted in applause, and that moment became the perfect ending to the evening. That night, I learned that love isn't about being perfect. It's about trust, effort, and believing in the bond you share. And I vowed to never let my fears cloud what we've built together ever again.